The morning sun cast long shadows across the training ground as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her gear one final time. Around her, 32 of the toughest Marines in the Corps cracked their knuckles and shared knowing grins. They had been told only that a Navy personnel would be joining their elite combat training exercise. What they didn't know was that the quiet woman standing before them had already completed missions that would make their most hardened veterans lose sleep. "Think she'll last 10 minutes?" whispered Sergeant Rodriguez to his buddy, watching Sarah check her weapon with methodical precision. "I give her 5, came the reply, followed by barely contained laughter. What these Marines didn't realize was that they were about to face someone who had spent years in the shadows, someone whose very existence was classified at the highest levels of military command. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just any Navy personnel. She was one of the few, the silent, the invisible. She was a Navy SEAL, and today, these cocky Marines were about to learn that assumptions could be deadly. As the exercise commander's whistle pierced the morning air, Sarah allowed herself the smallest of smiles. She had heard their whispers, seen their dismissive glances, felt their underestimation settle around her like armor. Good. Let them think she was weak. Let them believe she didn't belong. Because in exactly 30 minutes, when the smoke cleared and the dust settled, there would be 32 very humbled Marines and one lesson they would never forget. Never judge a warrior by their appearance. The game was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell was ready to remind everyone why the SEALs had earned their legendary reputation. Sarah Mitchell had always been different, though she spent most of her childhood trying to hide it. Growing up in a small town in Montana, she was the girl who climbed trees higher than the boys, who could outrun anyone in her grade, and who never backed down from a challenge. Her father, a retired Army colonel, recognized something special in his daughter from an early age, but even he couldn't have predicted the path she would eventually choose. At 18, while her classmates were heading off to college or settling into local jobs, Sarah walked into the Navy recruitment office in Billings with a determination that surprised even the seasoned recruiter. She had done her research, studied every branch of the military, and knew exactly what she wanted. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Williams, had seen thousands of young people walk through his doors, but there was something about Sarah's steady gaze and quiet confidence that made him take notice. "What brings you here today, miss?" he asked, setting down his coffee and giving her his full attention. "I want to serve my country in the most challenging way possible," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I want to join the Navy, and eventually I want to try out for the SEALs." Staff Sergeant Williams nearly choked on his coffee. In 2018, women had only recently been allowed to attempt SEAL training, and the physical and mental demands were so extreme that most male candidates failed. No woman had ever successfully completed the program and earned her trident. "Miss, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but SEAL training is, well, it's something that breaks most men. The dropout rate is over 80%, and that's for candidates who've been preparing their entire lives." Sarah leaned forward, her blue eyes never wavering. "With respect, Sergeant, I didn't ask about the statistics. I asked about the opportunity." That conversation set in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead Sarah to this moment, standing in the middle of a Marine training facility with 32 skeptical faces staring her down. But the journey between that recruitment office and this training ground had been anything but simple. Basic training at Great Lakes had been Sarah's first real taste of military life, and she had thrived. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands, Sarah found herself energized by the challenges. Her drill instructors, initially skeptical of the quiet girl from Montana, soon began using her as an example of what dedication and discipline could achieve. Petty Officer Martinez, her lead instructor, pulled her aside during the 6th week of training. "Mitchell, I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've seen a lot of recruits come through here. You've got something special. Have you thought about what you want to do after you finish here?" Sarah had been waiting for this conversation. "I want to go to Bud/S, Petty Officer. I want to become a SEAL." Martinez studied her for a long moment. He had heard rumors about women being allowed into SEAL training, but he had never encountered someone who seemed serious about actually attempting it. "You understand what you're asking for, Mitchell. Bud/S breaks people. Good people, strong people, people who think they're ready for anything." "I understand the risks, Petty Officer. Do you?" Martinez stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not talking about physical risks, Mitchell. I'm talking about psychological warfare. I'm talking about instructors who will push you beyond anything you think is humanly possible, then push you further. I'm talking about watching classmates quit, watching friends break, watching yourself question everything you thought you knew about your own limits. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Then I guess I'll find out what I'm really made of. After basic training, Sarah spent 2 years in the regular Navy, serving on a destroyer in the Pacific Fleet. She used every free moment to train, pushing her body and mind to new limits. She studied everything she could about SEAL operations, tactics, and history. She learned from veterans who had served in special operations, absorbing their knowledge like a sponge. Her commanding officers noticed her dedication. Commander Thompson, her division officer, had served alongside SEALs during his deployments in Afghanistan and recognized the qualities that made special operators successful. "Mitchell, I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer," he said during one of their routine evaluations. "Why do you want this so badly? And don't give me some generic answer about serving your country. I know you well enough to know there's more to it than that." Sarah considered the question carefully. She had been asked variations of it many times, but Commander Thompson deserved honesty. "Sir, I believe that everyone has a ceiling, a point where they think they can't go any further. Most people accept that ceiling as their limit. I want to find out what happens when you refuse to accept it." Commander Thompson smiled. "That might be the best answer I've ever heard to that question." When Sarah finally received orders to report to Bud/S at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, she had already been in the Navy for 3 years. She was stronger, smarter, and more determined than she had been at 18, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to face. The first day of Bud/S was designed to be intimidating, and it succeeded. Sarah stood in formation with 47 other candidates, all of them male, all of them staring straight ahead as Instructor Chief Ramirez paced in front of them like a predator sizing up prey. "Look around you," Chief Ramirez commanded. "Look at the person to your left. Look at the person to your right. Statistics say that 38 of you will quit before this program is over. Some of you will quit today. Some of you will quit next week. Some of you will make it all the way to Hell Week and then decide you've had enough." His eyes stopped on Sarah, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny. She had expected this moment, had prepared for it mentally, but the reality of being the only woman in a sea of male candidates was still jarring. "We have something special with us today," Chief Ramirez continued, his voice carrying across the formation. "We have our first female candidate. Now, I want to make something very clear to all of you. There will be no special treatment, no modified standards, no allowances made for anyone. You will all be held to the exact same standard, and that standard is perfection." The months that followed tested every fiber of Sarah's being. The physical challenges were brutal, but manageable for someone who had spent years preparing. It was the psychological pressure that proved most difficult. Every day brought new attempts to break her will, new challenges designed to make her question her decision to be there. During the 4th week of training, Sarah found herself struggling with a particularly difficult obstacle course run. She had been running for 2 hours in full gear and her legs felt like concrete. Behind her, she could hear Instructor Williams shouting encouragement and criticism in equal measure. "Come on, Mitchell. My grandmother could move faster than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. Sarah pushed harder, but her pace was slowing. Around her, other candidates were beginning to fall behind as well. This was exactly the kind of moment that separated those who would make it from those who would ring the bell and quit. Then she heard something that changed everything. "She's gonna quit," one of her classmates whispered to another as they struggled through the course. "No way she makes it through Hell Week." "I give her 2 more days, tops," came the reply. Sarah felt something ignite inside her chest. The same fire that had driven her to that recruitment office in Montana, the same determination that had carried her through 3 years of preparation, suddenly burned brighter than ever. She found reserves of energy she didn't know she had and pushed past both of the men who had been discussing her imminent failure. Hell Week arrived like a storm. 5.5 days of continuous training with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total. Sarah had read about it, trained for it, mentally prepared for it, but the reality was beyond anything she could have imagined. By the 3rd day, hallucinations were setting in. Sarah found herself having conversations with people who weren't there, seeing objects that didn't exist. Around her, candidates were quitting at an alarming rate. The bell that signaled surrender rang so frequently that Sarah began to tune it out entirely. During a particularly brutal surf drill at 3 a.m., with the Pacific Ocean water temperature hovering around 50 degrees, Sarah found herself standing next to James Porter, a former college football player from Texas, who had become one of her closest allies in training. "This is insane," Porter whispered through chattering teeth as they prepared for another round of surf torture. "I keep thinking about my warm bed back home, about how easy it would be to just ring that bell." Sarah looked at him, recognizing the same doubts she had been fighting for days. You know what I think about, she said quietly. What? I think about all the people who said I couldn't do this. Every person who looked at me and decided I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, tough enough. Every time someone assumed I would quit, she paused, feeling the weight of her words. I think about proving them wrong. Porter managed to smile despite the misery. You're crazy, Mitchell. Probably, Sarah agreed, but I'm still here. When Hell Week finally ended, only 14 candidates remained from the original class of 48. Sarah was one of them, and she was the only woman ever to successfully complete that portion of SEAL training. The celebration was brief. The remaining months of Bud/S brought new challenges. Advanced training in combat diving, land warfare, and small unit tactics. Sarah excelled in areas that surprised even her instructors. Her marksmanship scores were consistently in the top 5%, her tactical thinking was sharp and creative, and her ability to remain calm under pressure was remarkable. The final exercise of Bud/S was a simulated hostage rescue mission. Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a mock compound, neutralizing threats, and extracting a VIP. It was the culmination of everything they had learned, and it would determine who would earn their trident and who would be reassigned to other Navy duties. Sarah had been selected as team leader for the exercise, a decision that surprised some of her classmates but not her instructors. They had watched her natural leadership abilities develop throughout training and recognized her tactical acumen. As they prepared for the mission, Sarah gathered her team around a sand table model of the target compound. Okay, gentlemen, here's how we're going to do this, she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had evolved over months of shared hardship. The mission was a complete success. Sarah's team executed their plan flawlessly, adapted to unexpected complications, and completed their objectives with textbook precision. When the exercise ended and the instructors called for a debrief, Chief Ramirez had a rare smile on his face. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the gathered candidates, you have just witnessed what happens when training, preparation, and natural ability come together. Team Leader Mitchell, outstanding work. 3 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell stood at attention as the trident was pinned to her uniform, making her officially a Navy SEAL. She was the first woman to achieve this distinction, but she barely had time to process the historic nature of her accomplishment before she was whisked away to begin advanced training. The Navy had invested too much in her success to waste time on ceremonies. There were missions to prepare for, skills to master, and a reputation to build. Sarah spent the next 2 years in advanced training programs that most people would never know existed, learning skills that would make her one of the most capable special operators in the world. Now, standing in this Marine training facility with 32 skeptical faces staring her down, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about every challenge she had overcome, every person who had doubted her. Every moment when quitting would have been easier than continuing. The Marines around her were some of the toughest warriors in the world, and they had every right to be confident in their abilities. But they were about to learn something that Sarah had discovered years ago in the cold waters off Coronado. Assumptions could be dangerous, and underestimating someone based on their appearance could be a fatal mistake. As the exercise commander raised his hand to signal the beginning of the training, Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to remind everyone why the SEALs had earned their legendary reputation. The real test was about to begin. The whistle's shrill blast echoed across the training ground, and immediately the atmosphere shifted from casual skepticism to intense focus. Sarah watched as the Marines around her transformed from a group of curious onlookers into a coordinated fighting unit. Their movements were precise, practiced, and intimidating. These weren't ordinary soldiers, they were Force Recon Marines, some of the most elite warriors the Corps had to offer. Colonel Marcus Webb, the exercise commander, stood on an elevated platform overlooking the training area. He had designed this exercise specifically to test the limits of inter-service cooperation, but he had to admit he was curious about how the Navy's mysterious addition would perform. The woman's personnel file had been heavily redacted, containing only basic information and a note that she was cleared for all combat training exercises. Webb had been in the military long enough to recognize when someone's real job description was being kept classified. All right, people. Colonel Webb's voice boomed across the training ground through the PA system. Today's exercise is urban warfare simulation. The scenario is simple. Hostile forces have taken control of a compound containing high-value intelligence. Your mission is to secure the compound, neutralize all threats, and recover the intelligence package. The defending team will consist of 12 experienced instructors, playing the role of enemy combatants. Sarah listened carefully as the colonel outlined the rules of engagement, Live ammunition had been replaced with simulation rounds that would register hits on special sensors built into their gear. The kill ratio was set to realistic standards. A hit to the torso or head would result in immediate elimination, while hits to extremities would cause mobility restrictions but allow continued participation. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been chosen as the Marine team leader, approached Sarah with barely concealed condescension. "Look, Navy, I don't know what your background is, but this is serious business. Why don't you hang back and provide rear security while we handle the real fighting?" Sarah met his gaze calmly. "Sergeant, I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll be more useful closer to the action." Rodriguez laughed, a sound that was echoed by several Marines within earshot. "Closer to the action? Lady, this isn't a training video. These instructors are going to be shooting back, and they're not going to go easy on you just because you're Navy." "I wouldn't want them to," Sarah replied quietly. The training compound was a perfect replica of Middle Eastern architecture, complete with narrow alleyways, multi-story buildings, and countless hiding places for defenders. Sarah studied the layout carefully, her mind automatically calculating angles of attack, potential choke points, and escape routes. Years of advanced tactical training had taught her to see terrain differently than most people, not just as obstacles to overcome, but as tools to be used. Corporal Martinez, Rodriguez's second-in-command, was distributing assignments to the team. "Johnson and Phillips, you take the north approach. Thompson and Lewis, cover the east side. Rodriguez and I will take point through the main entrance." He glanced at Sarah almost as an afterthought. "Navy girl, you can follow behind us and try to keep up." Sarah simply nodded, but inside she was already formulating her own plan. The Marines were approaching this like a traditional assault, overwhelming force applied directly to the target. It was a sound strategy against most opponents, but the instructors defending the compound were veterans who would be expecting exactly this type of approach. As the teams moved toward their assigned positions, Sarah noticed something the Marines had missed. There was a drainage system running beneath the compound, with access points marked by small metal grates. The architectural plan she had studied during the briefing showed that these drains connected to a maintenance tunnel that ran directly under the building where the intelligence package was supposedly located. The assault began with textbook precision. The Marines moved with the confidence of warriors who had perfected their craft through countless hours of training and real-world experience. Rodriguez's team breached the main entrance with explosive charges, while the flanking teams moved to secure the perimeter. What happened next was a masterclass in defensive tactics. The instructors, led by Master Sergeant Patterson, had been running these exercises for years and knew every trick in the book. They had positioned themselves to create a killing field in the main courtyard, with overlapping fields of fire that would trap any attacking force in a crossfire. The first simulation rounds began flying as soon as Rodriguez's team entered the compound. Within 30 seconds, 4 Marines were eliminated, their sensor gear flashing red and emitting loud beeps to signal they were out of the exercise. Rodriguez himself took a hit to the shoulder that restricted his mobility, and the assault quickly bogged down. "Contact front," Rodriguez shouted into his radio. "Heavy resistance in the main courtyard. We need suppressive fire on the second-floor windows." Sarah watched the chaos unfold from her position near the rear of the formation. The Marines were good, very good, but they were playing by conventional rules, against opponents who had the advantage of prepared positions and intimate knowledge of the terrain. This was exactly the kind of situation where SEAL training would prove its worth. While the Marines were focused on their frontal assault, Sarah slipped away from the main group and made her way to one of the drainage grates she had spotted earlier. Her smaller frame allowed her to fit through spaces that would have been impossible for the larger Marines. Within minutes, she was moving through the maintenance tunnel system beneath the compound. The tunnels were dark, cramped, and filled with the kind of obstacles that would have deterred most people. Sarah moved through them like a ghost, her years of underwater infiltration training making the confined spaces feel almost comfortable. She could hear the sound of gunfire above her as the Marines continued their assault, providing perfect cover for her movements. 20 minutes into the exercise, Sarah emerged from a concealed access point inside the main building. She was now behind enemy lines, in the exact location where the intelligence package was supposed to be hidden. But between her and the objective were 3 instructors who were focused on the fighting outside. Master Sergeant Patterson was coordinating the defense from a command post he had established on the second floor. He was a 20-year veteran with combat experience in 3 different conflicts, and he was enjoying the opportunity to outmaneuver a team of Marines who had probably expected an easy victory. "Green team, shift fire to the east approach." Patterson spoke into his radio. "Red team, maintain coverage on the main entrance. These Marines are good, but they're predictable." Sarah moved through the building like a shadow, using every piece of cover available. Her SEAL training had emphasized the importance of remaining undetected for as long as possible, and she applied those lessons now. Each step was carefully planned, each movement calculated to avoid detection. The first instructor never saw her coming. Sarah approached from behind and placed her weapon against his back. "You're dead," she whispered, and his sensor gear immediately registered the kill. The second instructor turned at the sound of his teammate's elimination signal, but Sarah was already moving. She rolled behind a concrete barrier just as he opened fire, his simulation round sparking off the wall where she had been standing moments before. Sarah counted his shots, 7 rounds fired, which meant he had to reload. The moment she heard him changing magazines, she was up and moving. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. Sarah's simulation rounds found their target before the instructor could bring his weapon to bear, and another elimination signal echoed through the building. Master Sergeant Patterson realized something was wrong when his radio communications began reporting eliminations from inside the building. "What's your status, Blue Team?" he called into his radio. When he received no response, he knew they had a problem. "All units, we have enemy infiltration in the main building. Unknown number of hostiles have breached our perimeter." Sarah could hear the confusion in the instructor's voice, and she smiled grimly. This was exactly the kind of situation SEAL training had prepared her for. Operating alone, behind enemy lines, with minimal support and maximum effectiveness. She found the intelligence package exactly where the scenario had indicated it would be, in a secured room on the 3rd floor. But between her and the exit were Master Sergeant Patterson and 2 other instructors who had realized what was happening and were moving to intercept her. The final confrontation took place in the building's main stairwell. Patterson was an experienced warrior who had faced everything from insurgent fighters to foreign special forces. But he had never encountered anyone quite like Sarah Mitchell. Her movement was fluid, almost dancing, as she used the confined space to her advantage. Patterson fired first, but Sarah was already moving. She dropped to one knee and rolled behind the staircase support beam, her own weapon coming up as she moved. The exchange of simulation fire was brief but intense, with both fighters demonstrating the kind of precision that came from years of training. When the firing stopped, it was Master Sergeant Patterson's sensor gear that was flashing red. Sarah keyed her radio to contact the Marines who were still engaged in their frontal assault. "Marine Team Leader, this is Navy Element. Intelligence package secured. Compound interior cleared. You can call off your assault." The sudden silence that followed her transmission was almost comical. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio, filled with disbelief. "Say again, Navy Element. Did you just say the objective is secure?" "That's affirmative. Intelligence package in hand, all interior defenders neutralized. Building is clear." Colonel Webb's voice cut across all radio frequencies. "Cease fire. Exercise complete. All units return to the assembly area for debrief." As Sarah emerged from the compound carrying the intelligence package, she found 32 Marines staring at her with expressions that ranged from shock to grudging admiration. The same men who had been making jokes about her capabilities an hour earlier were now looking at her with something that resembled awe. Rodriguez approached her, his earlier condescension replaced by curiosity. "How did you get inside without us seeing you?" "Drainage system," Sarah replied simply. "Sometimes the best way through a problem is around it." Corporal Martinez shook his head in amazement. "We've been running exercises against these instructors for months. Nobody has ever managed to complete the objective without significant casualties." "Different training, different approach," Sarah said. She could see the questions in their eyes, the curiosity about who she really was, and how she had acquired the skills they had just witnessed. Master Sergeant Patterson joined the group, his expression mixing professional respect with honest amazement. "In 15 years of running these exercises, I've never been outmaneuvered like that. Where did the Navy find you?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Same place they found all of us, Master Sergeant. They looked for people who don't know when to quit." Colonel Webb called for everyone's attention as he prepared to conduct the official debrief. The exercise had been designed to test the Marines' capabilities against a prepared defense, but it had become something entirely different, a demonstration of why Special Operations Forces had earned their reputation. "Gentlemen," Webb began, his voice carrying across the assembled group, "what you just witnessed was a perfect example of why we conduct joint training exercises. Different branches of the military bring different strengths to the battlefield, and today you saw how those strengths can complement each other." The colonel's eyes found Sarah in the crowd. The Navy representative demonstrated textbook special operations tactics, reconnaissance, infiltration, and precision elimination of targets. Her approach was unconventional but highly effective. Rodriguez raised his hand. Sir, with respect, what exactly is the Navy representative's background? Her tactical skills seem beyond normal Navy training. Colonel Webb paused, glancing at Sarah before answering. That information is classified, Sergeant. What I can tell you is that she represents the Navy's best, just as you represent the Marine Corps' best. As the debrief continued, Sarah noticed the change in how the Marines were treating her. The dismissive glances had been replaced by respectful nods. The whispered comments about her capabilities had been replaced by questions about tactics and technique. She had earned something that couldn't be given or taken away: professional respect from fellow warriors. But Sarah knew that the day's challenges weren't over. The exercise had been designed as a multi-phase operation, and the successful completion of the first objective was just the beginning. Phase 2 would test different skills, present new challenges, and give the Marines an opportunity to see more of what she was capable of. As they prepared for the next phase of training, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in the span of a few hours. The Marines who had surrounded her with skepticism were now looking to her for tactical input. They were beginning to understand that their assumptions about her capabilities had been not just wrong, but dangerously naive. The transformation was exactly what Sarah had expected, but it still felt satisfying. Every challenge she had overcome, every moment of doubt she had pushed through, every person who had underestimated her had contributed to this moment. She was no longer just a woman trying to prove herself in a man's world. She was a warrior who had earned her place among warriors. The second phase of the exercise began 2 hours after the compound assault, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Where once there had been casual dismissal and barely concealed amusement, now there was professional curiosity and growing respect. The Marines moved around Sarah with the cautious acknowledgement that they were dealing with someone whose capabilities they had seriously underestimated. Colonel Webb had designed Phase 2 to be even more challenging than the first. This time, the scenario involved a hostage rescue operation in an active combat zone. The twist was that the teams would be working against a countdown clock. They had exactly 45 minutes to locate and extract 3 civilian hostages before simulated enemy reinforcements arrived in overwhelming numbers. The stakes are higher this time, Webb explained to the assembled group. You're operating in hostile territory with limited intelligence and even more limited time. The enemy knows you're coming and they've had time to prepare. Your success will depend not just on individual skill, but on how well you work together as a unit. Sergeant Rodriguez had undergone a remarkable transformation in his attitude towards Sarah. The same man who had suggested she provide rear security was now actively seeking her tactical input. Navy, what's your read on this situation? He asked as they studied the intelligence briefing. Sarah examined the aerial photographs of the target area, a series of interconnected buildings in an industrial complex. The hostages are being held in 3 separate locations, she observed. Classic dispersion tactics. The enemy wants to force us to split our team, making us vulnerable to defeat in detail. So how do we counter that? Asked Corporal Martinez, who was now treating Sarah as an equal member of the planning team rather than an unwelcome addition. We don't split up, Sarah replied immediately. We hit them fast and hard, one location at a time. Speed and surprise will be our advantages, not firepower. The Marines nodded thoughtfully. They were beginning to understand that Sarah's approach to tactics was fundamentally different from their own. Where they had been trained to use overwhelming force and direct action, she thought in terms of stealth, misdirection, and precision. Master Sergeant Patterson, who had been observing the planning session, spoke up. That's an interesting approach, but you're working against the clock. Can you really clear 3 separate buildings in 45 minutes using stealth tactics? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Master Sergeant, stealth isn't about moving slowly. It's about moving efficiently. When you eliminate wasted motion and unnecessary engagement, you can actually move much faster than conventional assault tactics would allow. As they prepared for the exercise, Sarah noticed something interesting happening within the Marine unit. They were adapting their standard operating procedures to incorporate her suggestions. Rodriguez reorganized his team structure to create smaller, more mobile elements. Martinez adjusted their equipment loadout to emphasize speed over firepower. Even the most skeptical Marines were now paying attention to her tactical recommendations. The exercise began with the teams inserting by helicopter into a landing zone 2 kilometers from the target complex. As they moved across the terrain toward their objective, Sarah demonstrated another aspect of her training that the Marines hadn't seen yet: her ability to read terrain and navigate with precision even under pressure. Contact bearing 090, approximately 800 meters. She whispered into her radio as they approached the complex. She had spotted enemy sentries that the Marines had missed, positioned to provide early warning of any approaching forces. Rodriguez immediately ordered his team to take cover. "How did you spot them?" he asked Sarah quietly. "Movement against background," Sarah replied. "They're good, but they're not invisible." What followed was a masterclass in small unit tactics. Sarah led a two-man team on a flanking maneuver that eliminated the sentries without alerting the main force. Her movements were so smooth and coordinated that the Marines watching began to understand why Special Operations Forces had such a fearsome reputation. "Jesus," whispered Lance Corporal Johnson to his teammate. "Did you see how she took out that sentry?" "I didn't even see her move." The first hostage rescue went exactly according to Sarah's plan. They approached the building from an unexpected angle, neutralized the guards with precision fire, and extracted the hostage without raising an alarm. 12 minutes elapsed time. The second building presented more challenges. The enemy had learned from the first rescue and had increased security, but Sarah adapted her tactics accordingly, using the building's own structure against the defenders. She led the team through a service tunnel that brought them directly into the building's basement, bypassing all exterior security. "How did you know about the tunnel?" Martinez asked as they prepared to clear the building from the inside out. "Building schematics," Sarah replied. "Most industrial complexes built in this era have similar layouts. When you've studied enough of them, you start to see the patterns." The second rescue took 18 minutes, including the time needed to treat a simulated wound on one of the Marines. They still had 15 minutes to reach the third and final hostage. But the third building was different. The enemy had realized what was happening and had consolidated their forces. Sarah could see from their surveillance that they were walking into a trap. The building was too heavily defended for a direct assault, and they were running out of time.
"We need a distraction," Sarah said as she studied the situation.
"Something big enough to draw most of their forces away from the hostage." Rodriguez looked at the building, then at his remaining ammunition and equipment. "What did you have in mind?" Sarah's plan was audacious even by SEAL standards. She would create a diversion by appearing to launch a frontal assault on the building's main entrance, drawing the defenders' attention and firepower. Meanwhile, the Marines would infiltrate from the rear and secure the hostage. The timing would have to be perfect. Too early, and the diversion wouldn't be effective. Too late, and they would run out of time. "Navy, that's basically a suicide mission," Rodriguez protested. "You'll be facing the entire enemy force alone." Sarah checked her weapon and gear one final time. "Sergeant, I've been training for situations like this my entire career. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." What happened next would be talked about in Marine training circles for years to come. Sarah Mitchell, alone and outnumbered 10-1, launched what appeared to be a desperate frontal assault on a heavily fortified position. But it wasn't desperate at all. It was carefully calculated, theater designed to achieve a specific tactical objective. She moved like a ghost across the battlefield, using every piece of cover available while maintaining enough visibility to keep the defenders focused on her position. Her simulation fire was precise and effective, eliminating 3 defenders in the first 30 seconds while avoiding the concentrated return fire through a combination of speed, timing, and tactical brilliance. The diversion worked perfectly. The defenders were so focused on the apparent suicide assault that they failed to notice the Marines infiltrating from the rear. By the time they realized what was happening, Rodriguez's team had already secured the final hostage and was preparing to extract. "All packages secure," Rodriguez reported over the radio. 43 minutes elapsed time. "Mission accomplished." Colonel Webb's voice crackled over all frequencies. "Outstanding work, people. Exercise complete. All units returned to base for debrief." As the teams gathered for the final debrief, the transformation in the Marines' attitude towards Sarah was complete. These weren't the same men who had been making jokes about crushing the Navy representative a few hours earlier. They were looking at her with the kind of respect usually reserved for proven combat veterans. "Navy," Rodriguez said as they walked back toward the base, "I owe you an apology. When this day started, I thought you were going to be a liability. Instead, you probably saved all our asses." Sarah simply nodded, but inside she was processing the significance of what had just happened. She had not only proven herself to these Marines, she had earned their genuine respect and trust. That was something that couldn't be faked or forced. It had to be earned through demonstrated competence under pressure. Master Sergeant Patterson approached as they reached the debrief area. "I have to ask," he said quietly, "what's your real background? Because what I just watched wasn't normal Navy training." Sarah glanced around, noting that several Marines were within earshot and clearly hoping to finally learn something about her mysterious qualifications. She made a decision that would change how these Marines viewed not just her, but the entire Special Operations community. Master Sergeant, what you witnessed today was the result of Navy SEAL training. I'm part of a very small community of operators who specialize in exactly the kinds of missions you saw today. The silence that followed her revelation was profound. Several Marines actually stopped walking and stared at her with expressions of complete shock. The significance of what she had just told them was sinking in. They had been working alongside one of the most elite warriors in the American military. "You're a Navy SEAL?" Rodriguez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's correct, Sergeant." Lance Corporal Johnson, who had been one of the most vocal skeptics at the beginning of the day, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. When this day started, I said some things. I made some assumptions that were completely out of line." Sarah looked at the young Marine with understanding. "Lance Corporal, you reacted the way most people react when they see something unexpected. The important thing is that you adapted when you received new information. That's the mark of a professional warrior." Colonel Webb called for everyone's attention as he prepared to conduct the final debrief. "Today's exercises provided some valuable lessons for all of us," he began. "Most importantly, we learned that assumptions about capabilities can be dangerous in a combat environment. Our Navy representative demonstrated why the Special Operations community has earned its reputation. Her tactical thinking, technical skills, and operational effectiveness were exceptional. But more than that, she showed how different military specialties can complement each other to achieve mission success." The Colonel's expression became more serious. "I want everyone here to remember this day when you encounter something or someone that doesn't fit your preconceived notions. In combat, your life might depend on the capabilities of people who don't look like what you expect a warrior to look like." As the formal debrief concluded, several Marines approached Sarah individually to express their respect and ask questions about SEAL training and operations. The curiosity was genuine and professional, a far cry from the dismissive comments they had made earlier in the day. Corporal Martinez was particularly interested in the tactical principles she had demonstrated. "When you were planning that infiltration, how did you know which approach would work? It seemed like you had considered possibilities that never occurred to the rest of us." Sarah thought carefully about how to answer. "The training is designed to make you think differently about problems. Instead of asking, how do we fight through this obstacle, you learn to ask, how do we avoid having to fight at all? Sometimes the most effective solution is the one nobody expects." "Is it true that no woman had ever completed SEAL training before you?" asked Lance Corporal Thompson. "That's correct," Sarah replied. "I was the first, but I won't be the last. The standards haven't changed, but the opportunity now exists for anyone who can meet them." Rodriguez, who had undergone perhaps the most dramatic change in attitude, made a point of speaking with Sarah privately as the group prepared to disperse. "Navy, I want to thank you for today. You could have embarrassed us, could have made us look like fools after the way we treated you at the start. Instead, you helped us succeed and made us all better." Sarah smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had shown all day. "Sergeant, we're all on the same team. The goal isn't to embarrass anyone. It's to make sure everyone goes home alive when it matters." As Sarah prepared to leave the training facility, she reflected on what had been accomplished that day. When she had arrived that morning, she had been surrounded by skeptical Marines who had made assumptions about her capabilities based on nothing more than her appearance. By the end of the day, those same Marines were treating her as a respected colleague and valued teammate. The transformation hadn't happened because of her rank or position. It had happened because she had demonstrated through her actions what she was capable of achieving. She had shown them that competence and courage weren't limited by gender, that effectiveness in combat came from training and dedication rather than physical appearance. But perhaps most importantly, she had reminded everyone present of a fundamental truth that sometimes gets forgotten in military training. The most dangerous opponents are often the ones you underestimate, and the most valuable allies are sometimes the ones you least expect. As she drove away from the base, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The day had gone exactly as she had hoped. Not because she had wanted to embarrass anyone, but because she had wanted to change minds and challenge assumptions. The Marines she had worked with would never again make the mistake of underestimating someone based on their appearance, and they would carry that lesson with them throughout their careers. More than that, they had learned something about the Special Operations community that would make them better Marines and better warriors. They had seen firsthand why SEALs had earned their reputation, and they had gained a deeper appreciation for the different strengths that various military specialties brought to the battlefield. The title "We'll Crush You" had seemed appropriate at the beginning of the day, when 32 confident Marines had surrounded a single Navy representative they assumed would be easy to overwhelm. By the end of the day, they had learned that sometimes the person who gets crushed is the one who makes assumptions about their opponent's capabilities. Sarah Mitchell had reminded them all that in combat, as in life, it's not the size of the warrior in the fight that matters, it's the size of the fight in the warrior. And sometimes, the most important battles are won not with overwhelming force, but with superior preparation, tactical thinking, and the refusal to accept limitations that others try to impose. The Marines had learned their lesson, but more importantly, they had gained a new level of respect for the diverse talents and capabilities that make the American military the most effective fighting force in the world. And Sarah had once again proven that breaking barriers isn't about demanding respect, it's about earning it through demonstrated excellence under pressure. "We'll crush you." Marines surrounded her in training, unaware she was a Navy SEAL.